Hello and welcome to this Business Day Focus 4.0 dialogue in partnership with Johannesburg Business School, Eiffel Corporation, Veeam Software and Snaplify. I'm Alicia Sekham, and I think only apt that we're hosting a hybrid event this morning with some of you joining us live right here at our studios in Empire, Johannesburg, and some of you joining us remotely, whether it be from home or office. So thank you all for being with us this morning. Now, there's no running away from the fact that digital transformation has unleashed a new journey for organizations to explore. We're looking at a hyper-connected world where information is the commodity, allowing organizations to accelerate the adoption of disruptive technologies, and there are considerable opportunities to be seized. But if the technologies are leveraged correctly, whether within the business itself or in the business's interaction with its consumers. So, over the next hour, we're going to be exploring some of the trends in play, influencing the digital transformation approach, and how organizations can leverage disruptive technologies to remain competitive in this rapidly changing landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, while we will be having bulk of the conversation on this platform today, we are looking to keep things as interactive as possible. So if any of you joining us in person or online have questions for any of our panelists this morning in the room, raise your hand once I open up the floor and fire away. And online, share your questions via the live chat for me to pose on your behalf. Joining me right now in studio, I've got Miles Thies. He's Director of Digital Learning Services at Eiffel Corporation. Chris Norton, sitting next to him, Regional Director for Africa at Veeam Software, and Wesley Lynch, who's CEO of Snaplify as well. So welcome and thanks for joining us live this morning. Joining us online is Professor Arnesh Teluktari. He's Professor of Digital Business and Research Chair at the Johannesburg Business School. So once again, welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to start the conversation off remotely today. And Professor, I'm going to pose the first question to you because I've been having a lot of conversations recently about digital transformation. There's a recognition, of course, that we have leapfrogged into the digital arena. There's a broad consensus as to why this is important, and to a degree, enough of an understanding of why the opportunities to be leveraged is critical to an organization's success. But there are challenges making this entire journey a tricky one to navigate. So how much of the conversation, Professor, that we're having on platforms like these actually translating into reality? Where exactly is South Africa when it comes to digital transformation?
Good day, good morning. Yes, thank you very much. I think it's obviously a very interesting contemporary conversation, and lots of people around the world are having this conversation on various platforms. At the Johannesburg Business School, we are quite privileged that we focus based on our digital transformation agenda as driven by our VC, Prof. Marwala. So interestingly enough, if we were to ask where South Africa is relative to the rest of the world, ourselves, well placed globally, certainly competing, but trying our best to keep up at the same time, obviously based on the rapid evolution of the space.
Absolutely. Chris, what are some of the barriers to digital transformation? I mean, the top three that spring to mind for me: lack of skills, cost, organizational culture, and those alone make this era a very tricky one to navigate.
Yeah, Alicia, I think what a lot of organizations who have digitally transformed, or industries that have digitally transformed, have got right is that there is a big enough market and an accessible market for them to address. Some of the markets that have not actually moved quite as quickly tend to be slightly behind the curve in terms of people's access to technology, the organizational ability to provision the infrastructure necessary to deliver digital transformation at an end user level. And somewhere in between, you have something like the fashion industry, which is very much a product of, or the retail industry is very much a product of COVID. where we had a key influencing event that has driven almost macroeconomic change in that segment. So, the barriers to that are accessibility to infrastructure, and the ability to transform at the rate or the demand, the rate that the demand accelerates. So, they can't necessarily always build the back end as fast as the front end is consuming it.
Yeah.
And that's often a big barrier for organizational change. And I think you'll find that in private educational institutions, that's not necessarily the case. But in the public educational institutions, it most certainly is. There's definitely a willingness to consume education online, but it's not always made available because the back-end infrastructure can't keep pace.
Despite the challenges, though, Miles, as Chris highlighted, there is progress being made in some quarters, right? So there's a driving force behind this digital agenda. What's driving the agenda despite the challenges?
Well, I think Chris alluded to it there. It's certainly access. I mean, that's unfortunately, despite all the challenges we've just been through with COVID, it's something that we're still having to face on a daily basis. And as recently as last week, I attended a conference down in Durban where there's a lot of government and ministerial representation from South Africa and across the region, and that seems to be the prevailing issue, is how do we create this access, how do you make it cheap enough, and how do you get more people online in order for this digital transformation really to start expressing itself more widely.
Yeah. And how that translates then, Wesley, into productivity and profitability at the end of the day for business is the imperative at the end of the day. So outline some of the opportunities to be leveraged if we start getting this more right.
Obviously, every sector has, I suppose, a different journey. But alluding to what other panelists have said, looking at the impact of COVID on retail, perhaps in the areas of efficiencies, it's easy to see there where the digital transformation is providing that accessibility. Accessibility brings scale. Scale hopefully brings greater margins. I think, in some of the other areas, maybe, particularly where we're working in education, there's definitely another way to look at profitability through the lens of sustainability, but it's kind of the same mechanisms that are at play, just looking at them in a slightly different way. So there are some parallels we can draw from retail sector and apply into education. But we've seen enough in other markets overseas and other areas, not just of business, but I suppose of human life, where we've seen digital accelerate things or have efficiency. There's no reason to see why they don't apply in perhaps slightly different ways, but certainly do have this universal application across, all industries.
Yeah. Miles, that's part of the incentive, right? Why a well-defined digital strategy matters for any organization. So where do you start when it comes to incorporating solutions for some of the challenges you come up against in this area? And how do you start to integrate this within the broader strategy?
Well, I mean, we get quite involved with this, certainly with a lot of the institutions we work with. And I think one of the biggest challenges we see is there's not really enough contextualization of how that strategy is actually defined. So, we're talking about specific industries and education themselves. There's this constant stream of transformation happening all the time. Yeah. We had 4IR, a couple of years ago. Now it's digital transformation. It's really up to the organizations to really define exactly what that means for them, what they can do with the resources available to them, how can they leverage their stakeholders to help them achieve that, and then in some respects staying the course. So we can't simply jump to certain types of novel technology because it presents some type of opportunity. At the end of the day, some of the same challenges there persist year after year. So if we can consistently address those issues, it helps us build up kind of a digital sustainability or capability across the organization, which allows us to then take on board some of the more transformational technologies that we come across all the time.
Yeah, and Miles, Wesley, pinpointing something that's crucial and needs highlighting here, that the right investments into the right technologies have to come into play here. So what are the key considerations when selecting and investing in technology or software solutions?
I think a big part is looking at your organization and understanding what is the rate at which you can absorb that change? There's a lot of talk in the introduction of technology, and even if we look at what we've seen in the retail sector, it's, there's digital transformation and then digital disruption. And particularly when you're dealing with large organizations, disruption is a difficult thing. So there needs to be pace in, and often that's managing the human aspect of it. So I think making sure that there's areas and maybe different divisions within the organization can actually manage the rate of change quicker. So even when, again, in this education context, we've seen that, in business, they at least operate in these quarterly cycles, but it's quite difficult to introduce change in the education sector that has almost this inherent annual cycle. So I think it's about being mindful of the change management aspect and the people side of things over and above just the technology choices.
Yeah. Anesh, we had Wesley there highlighting how difficult this could be for large organizations, but where we're looking at organizations at different stages and, of course, boasting different kinds of muscle, what impact is digital transformation having within the SME space particularly?
Yes, thank you. So at the university, we are significantly focusing on small enterprises, entrepreneurship, etc., and digital. So we've been working with various companies, and we find that, obviously reviewing literature, global best practice, etc., that the traditional approach is to engage and to work with small enterprises to a certain extent. But certainly some of the constraints highlighted in bigger organizations, skills, infrastructure, capacity, but certainly small enterprises have additional challenges, certainly availability of time. The understanding of the digital space we find to be a significant challenge. Everyone bases digital on what knowledge they've taken in through the media, etc., but maybe not a very holistic. Financial constraints on a small enterprise is very significant. It's very difficult to get an owner or his limited team to spend hours upon hours investing in digital transformation. So these are some of the limitations we've found with the small enterprise. And also there's a large level of apprehension because these solutions cost a lot of money, may not or may deliver value, but at the same time consumes resources of the small enterprise. So there's all of that we find that are significant challenges in the non-large enterprise space.
So Chris, let's run with that for a minute there. If we consider limited resources and tight budgets, right? Where should investment into tech-driven solutions be focused for maximum effect?
So, Alicia, I think the first thing to understand is that consumption-based models exist in many forms today, shapes, manners, and forms. And it's not necessary to go and outlay significant amounts of cash up front. You can rent on a consumption basis infrastructure from the hyperscalers, Amazon's, the AWS, the Azure platforms, Google Cloud. All of those organizations can provide some level of infrastructure for you to start building that. I think where the professor is quite right is that the challenges at an SME level are sometimes around the app creation or app development in order to make your application digitally born or born in the cloud or whatever you want to call it, digitally native, so that it can actually be delivered using a cloud platform and you don't need to physically provision everything. All of the interconnects, all of the interfaces, everything exists in that environment. And the beauty of those type of environments as well is that they provide scale without the upfront investment. A good example for you on that would be, one of the biggest challenges for organizations when we adopted the Black Friday specials was how do you provision enough infrastructure in order to be able to keep your application available so that people can continue to buy all day long. And again, it's a cart and horse. Do you pay the money and then maybe you don't get your return, or do you not pay the money and you don't get your return, period? At least with cloud, you can scale in that environment. It's almost limitless. For a small organization, you could see it as limitless scale capability.
So is the problem then lack of understanding?
It's exactly what the prof said.
Yeah.
It said a lot of it is the understanding of the technology available and how to leverage that effectively at an SMB level to accelerate your organization without having to make the upfront investments.
So Miles, while this happens, as digital transformation accelerates, what do universities, what do places of learning need to be keeping in mind when it comes to how they're thinking about approach in order for this kind of momentum to be sustained in the workplace?
So, I mean, essentially the model of the university hasn't changed much in, the 800
Yeah.
years they've been around. So, I mean, the first thing is, and this does emerge in some places, and differences between public and private institutions, that, to be fair, some of the public institutions are thinking this way as well. How do they introduce, these types of models that kind of have a business focus and are able to leverage innovation into that kind of very traditional academic structure? Typically, it's not always an easy fit. You have people kind of on a very kind of established track. They deliver. It's a very established model. People come in, they go out, they get a degree. How do people come in and with these innovative ideas, and how does the university create opportunity to support them? And oftentimes, this, we end up talking things like funding, for instance. How do they keep those things going and perpetually help them to realize more from the opportunities that they're enabling?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we see a lot of these entrepreneurial programs kind of emerge, but oftentimes, there's a shelf life to some of those initiatives. How do they keep those going? How do the universities extend their footprint into those businesses, maybe post their development? So we see them being successful outside of the ecosystem of the learning institution.
Yeah, what role then do the technology partners, do private sector play in this entire equation, helping institutions develop and meet needs of the future?
I mean, potentially it's very specific to each type of industry and business. One particular way that we're looking at this is, we've identified that obviously a big focus for learning institutions is creating opportunities for entrepreneurship. And as we've heard, there's a lot of challenges. It could be on the technical side. Usually it's a lot of business skills and obviously on the funding side. But by creating, first of all, kind of a platform that enables entrepreneurs to, for instance, be able to process payments, for instance, be able to market themselves, to have a ready market that they know is secure. That's already one step towards giving enough people exposure to their product or service, which then allows them to think about things further.
Yeah.
So we have a particular solution that enables universities to be able to provide that to entrepreneurs, give them a safe way to actually conduct transactions, financially secure, and to kind of a ready marketplace, because we recognize that there's a vibrant economic community that exists within the university or any learning institution. There are students there that can spend money. There are merchants in that space that also can help and that they can leverage into. So that's one way that could happen.
But it can't happen in silos. So let's bring collaboration in at this point, Wesley. How much collaboration happening with other organizations to continually spark the innovation that needs to happen in order to keep up with the times and this fast-paced evolution that we are seeing?
So I think collaboration is probably what is going to move the needle the most, from an effort to reward. And, adding on to the role that I suppose tech providers and platforms bring is also, quite often we'll be working with multiple institutions, and those institutions historically haven't collaborated or often might even see themselves as competitors, but there's lessons to be learned. So often, we can provide a platform for those lessons to be shared. And then, I suppose years ago when people were looking at what an online university, online school would look for, maybe naivety or optimism, there was this belief that there would be one platform. But like in most cases with technology, it really often is a number of different providers, different platforms integrated to provide one solution, that is localized in that particular context. And in order to do that well, you need collaboration. So adopting of more open standards. And I think there's a big role for private companies providing the services to collaborate more, us put our heads together and solve the problems for our customers before they've come to us. And, that is happening, but certainly there needs to be more of it, and understand that, but even when we look at the educational space, there's much broader players involved, so the telcos play an important role. So even do the banks, maybe a little bit further along. And, what does this pool of collaborators look like? It's probably a lot bigger than it currently seems to be.
So Wesley, let's take it beyond the theory and look at what's practically in play, because both Eiffel Corp and Snaplify, two edtech specialists that are collaborating, you've come together offering integrated solutions. What holistic approach are you actually putting on the table for institutions?
So obviously, when there's complementary services like what Eiffel Corp and Snaplify do, there's integration within our own applications, and then there's also integration that are provided by some of these other players, so AWS and the Microsofts and Googles of the world. So I think there are all these infrastructure integrations, which is everything from single sign-on. So one of the areas that we really focused on is identity management. If you want to roll out a lot of these programs on scale in a high school or university, if you've got multiple platforms, just managing the identity. Imagine you're a primary school teacher with all these kids saying, I don't know how to log on to, this piece of technology continuously. So solving some real world problems in the identity space, which spills over into privacy. And then ultimately, when we look at what technology can offer with regards to data-led decision-making, I mean, that goes hand in hand with a single view of the user. So those are very much, I suppose, technical solutions that ultimately unlock a benefit with educational purposes. So those, I think, very practical integrations.
Anesh, I guess what's important here is the fact that you've got technologies that are speaking to each other, that have built an ecosystem almost. And what it avoids is miscommunication happening along the way as you make progress. It holds back on costs that could be, racked up if the communication wasn't happening the right way. So what kind of investments are you making on your end, ensuring that we are building a properly working network and system that is frictionless at the end of the day?
Yeah. I think one of the highlights in terms of large enterprise, and that's where we take a lead, right? We look at what we would call an ecosystem. The tradition is to look at data or systems, but I think the integrated set of systems leaning towards a more ecosystem-based approach, be it in a large corporate, be it in the government sector, or be it for small enterprises. And here is where we leverage value by bringing together collections of systems. Obviously, we break away the towers of thinking. But more importantly, as highlighted by yourself, you tend to get more accurate data through the network. You get precision reporting, no room for errors, etc. Where if your business has multiple functions or multiple areas of delivery, let's say between sales and production, then there's a cohesive, visible network of integration between these functions. It's the same if there's interdependency between value chain, raw material delivery, product dispatching, customer management, etc. So this ability to create an ecosystem that's alive and active delivers maximum value. And at the University of Johannesburg, these are the concepts that are obviously taught in short learning programs, in our more advanced programs, and in our research areas up to our PhDs. But more importantly, we are also doing significant research and developing integrated sets of systems such as ERPs that are free to flight for low-income businesses, small enterprises, etc. So certainly a lot of practical work together with research and innovation that's happening, and a lot of training and awareness around ecosystems and integrated approaches is the areas that we are focusing on.
So that's where maximum value is being reaped on that end, or how maximum value is being reaped on that end. Miles, on your end, it presents a player like Eiffel Corporation with the opportunity to scale as well. So what are some of the benefits you're deriving as a player within this space when it comes to scale?
So, I mean, just leveraging the prof's points there, I think they're critical because, I mean, we really have to try and help our customers kind of realize the advantages that come from something like scalable cloud. And the points are very relevant there. You know, a lot of the training around some of these aspects are happening, and they're creating the conversations, but they aren't necessarily embracing it themselves. So this, I think it represents a significant opportunity to transfer a lot of those services into the cloud, which is where that's, you know, you talk about scale. There's a lot of opportunities for collaboration there. You know, there's a lot of university organizations that work together. As a block, they can potentially negotiate better contracts for themselves, so that they can actually bring down, they can introduce more funding into this so that they actually can realize that in other areas as well. But I mean, it only comes from them actually making the conscious decision to actually embrace the cloud. And typically, a lot of learning institutions, certainly in the university space, are about 5 years behind. So, you know, all the benefits that have been made in the corporate space, they really kind of have to leverage that, see the learnings that have been made there by the early adopters, and then start bringing that into their own space. Because ultimately, it's going to allow them to be able to achieve a lot of these sort of more sort of higher order aspects that are only going to be possible once they do that.
Yeah. How are you, Chris, rating organizations' readiness to venture down this path? You know, building digital pathways and connectivity on a collaborative basis. You know, the extent to which businesses are embracing collaborative spirit and the fact that it's needed to enhance competitive edge.
So, Alicia, I think what we see in our world, in the technology world, is these technology alliances being formed, the alliances between companies like Veeam and HPE and Amazon and Microsoft and all of those organizations. We see the organizations coming together because many years ago I attended a Gartner event, and one of the analysts stood up. He said, never discount the specialist, the niche player, ever, because they add significant amounts of value to the chain. And often these large organizations in their entirety cannot build that capacity. So they buy a few technologies and they're good enough. But then they can't build it themselves to the same level that the specialist vendors can. And when you collaborate between large organizations and find mutualistic opportunities where when you put the technologies together, you come up with a holistic solution that can be consumed at scale, that's when you start to really see value in the marketplace. You know, we're talking a bit about education today, and we're quite focused on it, but, you know, education won't change until it's no longer an obligation, it's a business. So when education is seen as a business and not an obligation as a country, then we might see some change, because you need to treat it like a business. You need to be able to understand that there's certain requirements that your clients will need, and there's certain capacity you're going to have to be able to provide. And all of that is 100% dependent, especially in the educational world, on access to connectivity. If you don't have that, cloud, none of the infrastructure you build, you won't be able to access people, and you won't be able to give the levels of access that you need.
Yeah.
So we look to government to provide a lot of those things. We look to the connectivity plans. We've had a lot of false starts in the educational industry around trying to digitize things. We had the Gauteng Online project back in the early 2000s, which started off with just to give everybody an online persona. It never really got off the ground. We spent a lot of money as a country doing it. The challenge there is that we didn't collaborate at that point in time. Everybody was trying to do their own thing and trying to commit their own technology as the best technology to deliver that solution, that Gauteng Online project. What's different now is that I think the IT market, or the industry, the technology industries, have evolved to a point where we understand that you are better together. So you have to look to somebody who does something better than you in a certain space, leverage that resource or that skill, and add yours as a complementary technology in the solution. So I do see there's a huge adoption or engagement in terms of those alliance features. We have them as an organization, and all organizations have those alliances. They even have tiers of alliances within the customers based on your investments.
While that evolution happens, Anesh, as a business coming out of the pandemic era, how have your needs shifted? What kind of evolution are you seeing on your end?
So, as an institution, obviously, the pandemic had significant impact. Moving to online was seamless at the University of Johannesburg, but maybe not so with a lot of other institutions. Coming out of the pandemic, we find that even students, let alone staff, want have a higher demand for online content, consumption of online content, and not just online content. Content needs to be available at any time to be consumed. Assessments and the ability to now provide the broader services beside teaching is also something that we're finding to be a significant component of our business. At JBS, we note that our online MBA is a multiple of our face-to-face MBA, as an example. We're also finding that the entrepreneurship space, our clients in entrepreneurs, the people we work with in business, are also expecting that we need to be online, similar to how we are today, right? And it's more flexible. Obviously, we spoke about load shedding, and the ability to move around right now is a challenge. So I think it brings a level of being a lot more dynamic, available, but also allowing us to do business differently, probably a lot more efficiently. And that's the same between our students, the companies that we work with, etc. So I think that would be what we are currently finding.
Wesley, how often does this re-evaluation of needs need to happen?
I think if we looked again generally in the education space, it's still only happening once a year, and it needs to happen way quicker. I mean, everywhere else in technology, people are, it's iterative. It's even the culture of celebration of failure and fail fast and learn. And obviously, when you're in some of these environments, that's not the culture. And definitely, if we looked at even improvements to go and say a semester, or if there's short courses, running these courses, and then making sure that every iteration of a course is slightly different or improved. I think it comes down to what the cycles are you have within your organization to be able to take stock and improve. But it's definitely not happening at the pace that we need it to be.
Yeah. It speaks, Chris, to digital capabilities that sit within organizations as well. So, how do business leaders go about developing the digital capabilities that are right to ensure that the right people, the right expertise is in place to manage technology and to adapt to a tech and data-driven economy fast enough?
It's a big question, that. How long have you got? Honestly, I think the biggest challenge in the industry is accountability, and vendors, technology providers, etc., need to be held accountable for the solutions they put in place and the solutions they recommend. As in any industry, especially the financial industry, there's a huge amount of fiduciary duties and accountability and responsibility applied to those organizations. It not so much in the technology world. It's okay to. Average is good enough in many instances, and companies mustn't accept that. There should be absolute accountability, absolute transparency when solutioning is provisioned or recommended. And people should be held accountable for the delivery of the solutions that they purport to sell. There are a lot of Me Too technologies outside there. There are a lot of people who can do it cheaper than somebody else. There's always that angle.
Yeah, I know that I said that I'm going to be leaving some of the Q&A session for the end of our discussion, but I'm going to rope this question in, Chris, at this point, because I think it's relevant now. So as you make these assessments, because you need to start holding people accountable, how do companies monitor ROI, or how can they justify the importance of it to management, specifically in your small to mid-level firms?
So return on investment is a very subjective point of view. You can make a spreadsheet look like anything. The investments that organizations make are preemptive. So they base their decisions on a return on investment that is given to them by an organization who's trying to sell them something. And it's quite a subjective position to be in. There are opportunities to investigate what other companies have achieved, ask for proof points, all of those sort of things, but companies don't. They accept the word of the person selling to them. They move ahead with the return on investment. And return on investment is something that is quite unique to every organization. Some organizations require a 3 times return on investments, and some organizations require a 5 million times return on investment. So for every dollar they spend, they either need $3 back or $5 million back. And that level of return is what will determine who's accountable in the organization for making the decision based on the return on investment metrics that were positioned either by the internal organization or by the third parties making the representation to the company. But, return on investment has always been quite a gray area in IT, because people spend a lot of money, and often the board and the excos see IT as a black hole. We just keep putting money in, and you just keep asking for more and more and more. But we're not getting the business value we were expecting.
But it moves way beyond just investing in the next new shiny toy. Professor, let's bring you back at this point and take it back to that skills development agenda, right? What should organizations, and what are you doing in particular to train and upskill your leaders to ensure that they future fit in order to handle some of the challenges that come with the digital transformation agenda?
So I think there's a significant amount of programs at the university. Obviously, the colleagues in the panel have highlighted some of them. We certainly offer short learning programs for a quick review of technologies, specific areas, etc. Moving up into our formal curriculum, there's various aspects that we prepare students for in undergraduate, etc. But the core focus comes in the postgraduate areas, where our MBAs, etc., are actually on digital transformation. That's what we focus on our MBA. So you would find various aspects, deep learning in these areas, and obviously more business-orientated learning, such as how to implement digital tools and systems, etc. And you'd also find we started a DPhil program, a PhD last year in digital transformation, and all our students are doing projects or research only in this digital agenda related to 4IR. And almost every one of the 33 new PhDs that we have come from industry-orientated individuals. We are also having various new programs that specialize in healthcare, digital transformation of the healthcare sector. So we have various tiers of programs that we focus on, providing these services, raising awareness. But the upper level of all of this is obviously being leaders in research in digital, bringing that knowledge, collaborating with universities and institutions globally, and bringing that knowledge and looking at implementing some of that in our curriculum, but also partnering. I think that's what the panel is also highlighting, with local companies where we accelerate, provide these tools, raise awareness of industry. So all of that is very broadly and in a very quick summary, some of the aspects that we are focusing on. Thank you.
And Miles, as we develop these skills and this expertise, this is how we start changing the narrative, right? Around how any business institution with a digital strategy doesn't necessarily have a job cut agenda following suit.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are critical aspects there. I think the Prof is again alluding to the fact that the institutions, it's more than just kind of formal programs that need to happen. They traditional track of training, and I go and learn how to become a program manager, for instance, or a programmer. A lot of the critical skills, especially for the workspace, comes from it's kind of the softer aspects that aren't necessarily part of kind of hardcore skills that somebody's going to learn about. So looking at from a digital transformation agenda, a lot of the learning that has to happen needs to happen in the digital space, for instance. So they're picking up those productivity skills that typical, Mr. CEO complains about, that, I'm getting a lot of people that are coming to me with formal education, but they aren't necessarily being productive from day one, which is what I need. And I think that one of the clearest indications of that is, you see big corporates like the Googles of the world or the Amazons of the world creating alternative tracks to get their own people and their own graduates into those courses so that can be work ready from day one. So I think that it's key that whatever learning programs we create, they have a significant focus on this transformation aspects, obviously on the digital aspect side, so that they can imbue all of their learning and involve every single one of their graduates in those processes so that they're workspace ready.
Yeah.
And I mean, this skills aspect, I think that the solution for a lot of the challenges we're talking about here, whether it be from a technical point of view all the way through to a business aspect, it all comes down to skills and being given the opportunity to use and flex those skills before actually being asked to use them.
Okay, so Chris, let's talk about some of the real risk that you've got to mitigate against then, because this kind of innovation doesn't come without a level of risk. What security challenges are you anticipating? And what are some of the implications for data management and protection as a result?
Okay, now we're getting into my area of understanding. But look, I think the biggest challenge is technology diversification. So as people start to leverage all of the technologies that are available to them, they move the environments that they used to work on. So pre-COVID, most customers or most people had a data center within their building. Their staff all used to come to the office. They could have firewalls around their local area networks, and they were able to secure their environments and their data. What did happen, though, is with the rapid acceleration into cloud and that knee-jerk response to COVID and moving people off into remote working capabilities, etc., is we increased the target area for attack of cyber criminals. And you've seen a huge increase in several-fold increase in the number of cyber attacks, and actually South Africa is heavily targeted as a community on the continent because we're seen as a wealthy nation and there's money here, and people want your data. They want to get control of your data because they can sell that back to you, and you then suddenly realize how much your data really is worth to you. So I think the risk that rapid expansion of technology capability and the hybrid nature of how we transact now, we don't transact within the four walls of our business. We transact at the edge, we transact in the cloud, we transact virtually, we transact across multiple networks, which were before used to be a virtual private network connection into the environment. We just can, as long as you can get a digital connection or a Wi-Fi connection, you can access your corporate resources, you can access your corporate environment. But if it's that easy for you to connect, it's just as easy for bad actors out there in the industry to do the same. And that rapid expansion of the target area for these guys has made it a lot easier for them to access the environments and monetize their job, which is in taking your data and holding you to ransom for it in many instances.
So you've got to develop a holistic strategy from beginning to end. Wesley, I know we touched on some of the challenges right at the top and as the conversations progressed as well, but after those hurdles are cleared and organizations get onto this path to digital transformation, it's got a handle on data protection as best it can. In your opinion, why does digital transformation still sometimes fail?
I think quite often it's not clear what the objectives are, or there's not universal agreement. It's not clear what the measurement is of that. And then often digital transformation fails because they're not actually doing digital transformation. Often the people that are assembled to drive it are the technologists, and the tech is only one part of it. It's not called sort of technology transformation. I think with it being digital is to bring in the business aspect and the human aspect. And so most of the cases when it really fails, I think it's kind of failed from the start. You know, the plan is flawed, not necessarily the execution.
Yeah.
And what are the motivations behind it? So, you know, clear, you know, even when we were discussing earlier around the ROI, I mean, what it stemmed from was saying, you know, it is subjective, and understanding what are the ROI expectations? Are they even realistic? And is technology going to be the silver bullet that comes along and changes it when there are things that are perhaps more fundamental and infrastructure? So I would say really as a start, people need to understand, like adopting any new technology, there's no technology for technology's sake, or even digital transformation for digital transformation's sake. You know, like, to what end and what is the strategy? Everyone needs to be aligned on that to begin with. You know, so it even goes back, you know, the digital transformation should be bringing flexibility, efficiencies, innovation.
Yeah.
And even if you're going to set out to do those really, really big things, if you haven't got this culture of collaboration, you're not really going to get there, I don't think.
Okay, so assess your plans right at the top. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the point where I'm going to be opening up the conversation to our audience joining us this morning. So if you're joining us live in studio, please indicate by show of hand if you've got a question for any of our panelists with us this morning, and a roving microphone will find its way to you. If you're joining us online, ladies and gentlemen, please use the live chat forum. We will be looking at the questions coming through there, and I'll be posing it to the panelists on your behalf as well. And quite a few questions coming through already. And perhaps I can start off, Miles, with you. There's a tendency towards legacy culture, which hampers a company's ability to implement digital transformation. How would you suggest changing this mindset? And I guess it kind of ties to, you know, does digital transformation need to be a data-driven agenda or more of a culture approach?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's probably aspects of both, but it probably firmly sits in the culture aspect. I mean, to Wesley's points, you know, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it really requires some solid leadership in order for, you know, to carry a transformation agenda, certainly with an institution. You know, we're talking education, so something like a university. There's a lot of moving parts. They are big communities. Not all of these relationships have a basis that can be deduced down to data, for instance. You know, it takes a lot of time to be able to work out exactly who these stakeholders are. So I think, you know, trying to determine exactly what it is you want to achieve, have a realistic timeline for that, thinking realistically about what budgets you can apply, who's coming along for the ride, what other leaders you're going to need in your different parts of your organization to be able to achieve that, and then being able to achieve that cohesive plan in a reasonable time period. But to throw some complexity into that, recognizing that potentially some of these challenges that you're trying to solve won't necessarily be solved right away. They could take years, for instance. As the question even says, there are legacy issues that you have to address. And particularly in a country as complex as South Africa, you know, with our complex social history, you have to think about how do we address some of these challenges in context of, you know, applying something like a piece of technology. You know, as we've heard it today, it's not necessarily a silver bullet. You're not going to solve all the challenges just by giving everybody access, for instance. There's new things that come into it. So I think having a really kind of an agile mindset really is helpful. Probably being a bit stoic about things as well, recognizing that not everything you try will work. And there's more disruptive technology on its way. So it's about being as agile as possible and recognizing that you could probably achieve most of what you set out to do, but recognizing that you will have to review these plans on an ongoing basis as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to cast a glance across the room. Are there any questions from the room, from audience members here? There we go. A question's coming through on that end. There we go.
Good morning. My name is Paul. I'm a hospitality educator in the SME space. So what I'm trying to find out is, I would like to, the question is for the three of you, so maybe you'll try and summarize it for me. So I'm trying to be as realistic as I can, you know, with regards to me introducing online learning from the people that for the people that I serve. So like I said, I'm in the hospitality industry. So what I would like to do is offer classes online. So under normal circumstances, people would come to an establishment, there's stoves, there's everything, and then they'll come and learn from there. So how would it work then if I were to do it online with people that are based in a location where they'll have to obviously pay for classes because I need to make money, but now also they also need to pay for data. So they'll be paying for the classes and they'll pay for the data in order to get access to whatever it is that I'm offering. And then also now we have a problem with load shedding. So what, I like the fact that you mentioned the business and the human aspect of things. Like how then does this now rope into me making sure that whatever I offer is they're able to use it and implement it? You know, am I being realistic and is it attainable?
Thanks so much, Mpo. And maybe, Wesley, if you can take that question, because the pivotal points to be highlighted there is accessibility, especially where in a country like South Africa and probably in parts of the rest of Africa as well, you're dealing with a very severe infrastructure deficits.
So I think it's accessibility and flexibility are key. And, you know, so when we looked even with what happened with the pandemic, you know, it wasn't for us that we saw many new things. A lot of these things were happening. It was an increase in scale. There were, you know, pockets that were already operating and teaching in these different methods. But what we saw were, even if you were an institution that already was teaching online, they began to evolve and offered, instead of you watching a lecture online streaming, instead you could now download it. So a lot of it was moving towards this flexibility. So, you know, data costs is a real issue. So a lot of the times, if you're going to do something online, you want to try to be in an environment where someone can download the content. So if that's a lecture or a piece of content, because they might be able to get it at a more affordable rate at a particular time. So, you know, all you can eat type hours, or they can go to public Wi-Fi. And then electricity is another complexity. So, you know, and it comes back to this flexibility provides an increased accessibility. People need to be able to now not only learn or attend a class online, but they need to attend that class when they're able to. So it's all about expanding what the flexibility is. You know, if you had to drive to go and attend a lecture, and now you still need to sit at a particular time to attend a lecture online, that doesn't help the student enough. So it needs to be a realization of more and more offering the service on not on the terms of the supplier, but on the terms of the user or the customer, which comes back to the point raised earlier about education being viewed more as a business. As the demands become more challenging on the students, they're going to, you know, pick those providers and those platforms that offer them more of the flexibility. And it's more about education being delivered on their terms than the terms of the institution. I think that's the biggest shift that we've seen. So I think if you bear that in mind, that's a great competitive advantage.
And that forming part of your business plan, but overall your business strategy as well, you know, adapting your products or services as an SME in order to cater to the online and digital generation, but within a very specific context and cognizant of some of the realities that your consumers are having to operate within. Miles.
Yeah, I mean, to add more context to that, I think we certainly saw, and I mean, this is from information we've gained from some of our partners as well, that, you know, even at that kind of lower level income, potentially where some of these students are coming from, they're actually very discerning. They actually understand a lot about how data works, how the costing works, to the point where they know exactly when is the best time to log on. For instance, they knew, for instance, when free minutes were being offered by one telco, there was a significant amount of activity happening very late at night. So they're very active about what they know, when they can access, which comes down to, I think, context. And, you know, a lot of the points Wesley was making as well, understanding exactly who is your student, what is their lived experience, what are they dealing with on a daily basis. This is where the data aspect can come into it. You know, there's a lot we can learn from, you know, somebody's activity online, but that doesn't really give us a real representation of who they are.
Yeah.
We actually need to understand things like, do they have enough food to eat? Do they have enough electricity? Do they have a, you know, regular route to work or to study? And those types of things help us develop a picture that help us address challenges that the typical student identified is going to resonate with and thus make them more successful potentially.
Yeah. And then, Chris, a question that's come through that I guess is up your alley. Living in a tech-driven world that will only continue growing, consumers put a lot of trust in businesses when it comes to their personal information. How can an organization instill confidence in their audience that their data will be safe and will be protected? And if we can maybe string to that how an organization deals with modern-day data breaches effectively.
Sure. So, look, everybody's data is worth something to them, but it's also worth something to somebody else. So there's always going to be that threat, and even more so now with the larger target area. But I think in terms of you know, people having their personal information protected, there is regulation that enforces it around POPI, and you have the GDPR in Europe, and you have all of these bodies that govern with punitive penalties in the event that you don't take care of customers' data. But for organizations, it's quite specific in terms of how they manage that space. So first of all, you have to try to keep the bad actors out, and that's very, very difficult. And to a point that was made earlier, it's not just the CIO's responsibility to do that, it's everybody's responsibility to do that. The way people target organizations are very, very ingenious, and these guys are very, very clever in terms of how they construct their attacks on the organization and how they gain entry. Once they're inside the organization, it's quite important that the company is able to recover in the event of a disaster, and it's a disaster recovery plan. You know, and a live hack or a hack in your environment, anyone getting into your organization is a disaster. And how you respond, there must be a disaster recovery plan in place. If you don't have that plan, it's going to end up terribly for the organization. But what's more important is the way that you protect the data that you do have access to and you are responsible for. And that's where organizations like our organization play a role, in that we provide the tooling for managing and protecting the data regardless of where the physical data sits or who's control, you know, is it in the cloud, is it virtual, is it physical? Is it on an employee laptop? We can, you know, it's how do you protect that data to ensure that as an organization, you are doing everything you can in an auditable fashion to provide security around the data and access to the data in the event that it gets wiped. I mean, imagine the entire banking system in South Africa was completely wiped out and there's no record of how much money you had in the bank. If you didn't have any money, you would be quite happy with that. If you had a lot of money, it would be a big issue. So, you know,
it's all about perspective, absolutely, and where you sit. Professor, we haven't forgotten about you. A question that's come through for you. What can institutions do to enable their faculty members to adopt a digital blended way of teaching?
Okay, I think that's a very interesting question, especially from a large institution perspective. Certainly, the institutions have to emphasize, you know, the use of some of these more sophisticated digital tools. So at the University of Johannesburg, it's mandatory to use Blackboard, and we have additional tools that we train staff on. We offer online training. So that ability to bring in the core of digital training is important. Supporting staff through their journey, having real-time response to queries, questions, support when there's actually an online lecture, etc., are components that actually make a huge difference to providing this fully comprehensive digital service to our students.
Absolutely. And I'm going to try and squeeze a final question in, cognizant of time here. Miles, perhaps to you, what role does hybrid working and flexible office space play in alleviating the need for these large IT infrastructures? Does it make sense to move your business into a flex space that already has these infrastructures in place?
Sure, it's a good question. I mean, and I think it's probably one we're all challenged with at the moment. With everybody coming back to the office, I think there's definitely a space for it. I mean, we're experimenting with a particular model. There's certainly advantages to being able to have this kind of hybrid model where you can bring new skills into the business relatively easy. People can work across different countries, territories, and time regions, and obviously potentially access to specific skills that don't necessarily exist in your region. You can bring those in as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's enormous benefits for certainly things like collaboration, generating ideas, working with your colleagues to kind of solve some of these challenges that really only work that well when you're in each other's space. Yeah. So I think it's really careful that organizations kind of pick the model that obviously works for them, but it's also critical when you're trying to determine what problems you're trying to solve. Some of these things lend themselves to working in the same space with each other, I think.
So many questions, just not enough time. But I guess that in itself, pointing to an indicative of just how much these conversations need to be had. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this morning's session. To my panelists, Anesh, thanks so much for joining us online this morning. Of course, Wesley, Chris, Miles, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, engaging with you, and getting your perspectives this morning. So thanks so much for sharing your views with us. And to our audience, thanks for your time and for engaging with us as well. This conversation, please take note, will be recorded and the link will be shared with you after the event, so do keep an eye out for that. And of course, a special thank you to our partners as well, Johannesburg Business School, Eiffel Corp, Veeam Software and Snaplify too. From me, Alicia Seckham, it's been a pleasure. Bye for now.